All right, so I'm going to cover the Neoclassicism 1 tutorial. We have two tutorials. So one is on the second treatise of government, and then the other one is just some stuff from Samuel Johnson, who you may remember from earlier in this unit. Um, okay, so I found a audio recording of the second treatise of government. So I'm going to play that in the background and then have the text on the screen for you. So we're going to play that and then we'll talk about the questions. So first question, what is the main idea that he is trying to convey? Explain what he means when he says tyranny is the exercise of power beyond right. And then based on the text, does Locke think that one type of government versus another is more susceptible to becoming tyrannical? So let me get this audio up and playing.
As usurpation is the exercise of power, which another hath a right to, so tyranny is the exercise of power beyond right, which nobody can have a right to. And this is making use of the power any one has in his hands, not for the good of those who are under it, but for his own private, separate advantage. When the governor, however entitled, makes not the law, but his will, the rule, and his commands and actions are not directed to the preservation of the properties of his people, but the satisfaction of his own ambition, revenge, covetousness, or any other irregular passion. If one can doubt this to be truth or reason, because it comes from the obscure hand of a subject, I hope the authority of a king will make it pass with him. King James I, in his speech to the Parliament, 1603, tells them thus: I will ever prefer the weal of the public and of the whole commonwealth in making of good laws and constitutions to any particular and private ends of mine, thinking ever the wealth and the weal of the commonwealth to be my greatest weal and worldly felicity, a point wherein a lawful king doth directly differ from a tyrant. For I do acknowledge that the special and greatest point of difference that is between a rightful king and a usurping tyrant is this, that whereas the proud and ambitious tyrant doth think his kingdom and people are only ordained for the satisfaction of his desires and unreasonable appetites, the righteous and just king doth by the contrary acknowledge himself to be ordained for the procuring of the wealth and property of his people. And again, in his speech to the Parliament, 1609, he hath these words: the king binds himself by a double oath to the observation of the fundamental laws of his kingdom, tacitly, as by being a king, and so bound to protect as well the people as the laws of his kingdom, and expressly by his oath at his coronation, so as every just king in a settled kingdom is bound to observe that paction made to his people by his laws in framing his government agreeable thereunto, according to that paction which God made with Noah after the deluge. Hereafter seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and night and day, shall not cease while the earth remaineth. And therefore a king governing in a settled kingdom leaves to be king, and degenerates into a tyrant, as soon as he leaves off to rule according to his laws. And a little after, therefore, all kings that are not tyrants or perjured will be glad to bound themselves within the limit of their laws, and they that persuade them the contrary are vipers, and pests both against them and the commonwealth. Thus that learned king, who well understood the notion of things, makes the difference betwixt a king and a tyrant to consist only in this, that one makes the laws the bounds of his power, and the good of the public, the end of his government. The other makes all give way to his own will and appetite. It is a mistake to think this fault is proper only to monarchies. Other forms of government are liable to it, as well as that, for wherever the power that is put in any hands for the government of the people and the preservation of their properties is applied to other ends, and made use of to impoverish, harass, or subdue them to the arbitrary and irregular commands of those that have it, there it presently becomes tyranny, whether those that thus use it are one or many. Thus we read of the 30 tyrants at Athens, as well as one at Syracuse, and the intolerable dominion of the decemviri at Rome was nothing better. Wherever law ends, tyranny begins, if the law be transgressed to another's harm, and whosoever in authority exceeds the power given him by the law, and makes use of the force that he has under his command, to compass that upon the subject, which the law allows not, ceases in that to be a magistrate, and acting without authority, may be opposed as any other man, who by force invades the right of another. This is acknowledged in subordinate magistrates. He that hath authority to seize my person in the street may be opposed as a thief and a robber, if he endeavors to break into my house to execute a writ, notwithstanding that I know he has such a warrant, and such a legal authority, as will empower him to arrest me abroad. And why this should not hold in the highest, as well as in the most inferior magistrate, I would gladly be informed. Is it reasonable that the eldest brother, because he has the greatest part of his father's estate, should thereby have a right to take away any of his younger brother's portions? Or that a rich man, who possessed a whole country, should from thence have a right to seize, when he pleased, the cottage and garden of his poor neighbor? The being rightfully possessed of great power and riches, exceedingly beyond the greatest part of the sons of Adam, is so far from being an excuse, much less a reason, for rapine and oppression, which the in damaging another without authority is, that it is a great aggravation of it. For the exceeding the bounds of authority is no more a right in a great than in a petty officer, no more justifiable in a king than a constable, but is so much the worse in him, that he has put more trust in him, has already a much greater share than the rest of his brethren, and is supposed, from the advantages of his education, employment, and counselors, to be more knowing in the measures of right and wrong.
All right. So, let's look at the questions. So the main idea that he's trying to convey in the reading selection is that it is possible, um, for tyranny to exist if a government starts to take away rights of people. Um, that's really what like the main concern is, and he's just trying to make it clear that people should be wary of tyranny. When he says that tyranny is the exercise of power beyond right here, um, which nobody can have a right to. So it's the usurpation of somebody's power. So it's taking power, like taking one person and using and getting all of their power and not using it for the good of the people that they are in charge of, but for themselves. And so it's just like the idea of making laws and taking money and things like that and not giving anything back to the people, and that is tyranny. And then, does Locke think that one type of government versus another is more susceptible to becoming tyrannical? And he says it right here in 201, it is a mistake to think this fault is proper only to monarchies. Other forms of government are liable to it. So no, he does not think that monarchies are the only type of governments that can become tyrannical, even though most of what he's talking about is about England, with the king and all of that. He does point out, though, that this happened in Athens and in Rome in section 201. So there you go. That really talks about that part of it. All right, now we're going to cover the second lesson activity in the Neoclassicism 1 tutorial, which is on Samuel Johnson. So there's an excerpt from the preface of his A Dictionary of the English Language. So we're going to look at who do you think Johnson's intended audience is in the excerpt that you read. What do you think his perspective is on the change in the English language? Does he think that it's good or bad? Does he think it should be stopped? According to Johnson, what are the causes of changes in language? Cite evidence from the excerpt to support your answer. Okay, so let's, hopefully you can read this on your own. It's not too long. I'll just go ahead and read it. Let me zoom in a tiny bit so it's a little easier on my eyes. All right. A large work is difficult because it is large, even though all its parts may singly be performed with faculty. Where there are many things to be done, each must be allowed its share of time and labor in the proportion only which it bears to the whole. Nor can it be expected that the stones which form the dome of a temple should be squared and polished like the diamond of a ring. Of the event of this work for which, having labored it with so much application, I cannot I cannot but have some degree of parental fondness. It is natural to form conjectures. Those who have been persuaded to think well of my design will require that it should fix our language, and put a stop to those alterations which time and chance have hitherto been suffered to make in it without opposition. With this consequence, I will confess that I flattered myself for a while, but now begin to fear that I have indulged expectation which neither reason nor experience can justify. When we see men grow old and die at a certain time, one after another, from century to century, we laugh at the elixir that promises to prolong life 1,000 years. And with equal justice may the lexicographer be derided, who, being able to pronounce no example of a nation that has preserved their words and phrases from mutability, shall imagine that his dictionary can embalm his language, and secure it from corruption and decay that is in his power to change sublunary nature, and clear the world at once from folly, vanity, and affectation. Okay, so he is pretty much, I can answer a couple of bits here. He's pretty much talking to people who care about the language. It's sort of like a nationalistic almost idea, because he doesn't like the changes that other languages are bringing into the English language. He brings up lexicographers, and he talks about like academics and stuff. And so realistically, he's really talking more to people in the academic realm than anything. Okay. What do you think Johnson's perspective is on change in the English language? Well, he really says it right here. Like just saying that uh, it brings corruption and decay and stuff like that. He, like, all throughout this, he even gives an example of like French getting changed. The French language has visibly changed under the inspection of the academy. And then if you look at this little footnote, the French established an academy to purify their language. They produced a dictionary in 1694, but it had to be revised a few years later. But like basically just doing whatever they can to not allow the language to be changed. And then here he talks about like how it really changes, this paragraph. So total and sudden transformations of a language seldom happen. Conquests and migrations are now very rare, but that, is generally how languages have changed in the past. But there are other causes to change which, though slow in their operation and invisible in their progress, are perhaps as much superior to human resistance as the revolutions of the sky or intumescence of the tide. Commerce, however necessary, however lucrative, as it depraves the manners, corrupts the language. That they that have infrequent intercourse with strangers, to whom they endeavor to accommodate themselves, must in time learn a mingled dialect, like a jargon which serves the traffickers on the Mediterranean and Indian coasts. So, he believes it, he doesn't like it. He doesn't think that the change is necessarily good, but he understands that it's inevitable and it's going to happen regardless because of trade. So that is that, and where you can find it. And then where's the last one? According to Johnson, what are the causes of changes in language? So again, it's, commerce, trade, the introduction of people across other cultures and other nations, is really big. And then even here, he says that just like the mixing of two languages will create a distinct third. And so he just sort of goes on about that. Yeah, that covers all of the Neoclassicism 1 lesson activities. Again, remember, please go through the entire tutorial because there's a lot that isn't covered by the lesson activities that might still be on your test.